Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Wake and Take. It's your boy Jason, and we've got some football to talk about today. It's Tuesday, it's Christmas Eve, but it's also a big waiver day, actually, with their Christmas games tomorrow. So I believe all the waivers should be running tonight at the very least, right? So we've got a lot of players to talk about today, and by a lot, I just mean 18. It's the last fantasy week of the season, so we are keeping it mostly genuine. All for the lens of this week to help you out. So it's going to be basically streamers as well as, some players that you're picking up, but they're all going to be in the hopes that you would want to play them. So without further ado, go ahead and take out your coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And welcome in, everyone. Glad to see you all in the chat this morning. As you maybe can tell, potentially not, this is a pre-recorded episode. Last night / tonight of recording this, had a little friends white elephant Christmas party gift exchange thing and didn't know if I would have the energy to be live on camera. So figured I'd go ahead and record it. I am planning to be in the chat though. So if you have questions regarding your own fantasy team, go ahead and put those down there. You can add them in the comments if you catch it after the show as well. I do want to help you guys because I know that this is a time where really your own personal team is going to come in handy here, the advice that you have for your own personal team. So go ahead and ask those questions. I'll be answering those on my phone or on my laptop, wherever I'm at. I didn't think I'd want to have camera presence this morning. More than likely, probably made the right decision as well. But we'll see. Maybe I would have been fine. I don't know. But hey, waivers. That's what you're here for. And as mentioned, right, this is the last week of the season. So you're not really worried about picking any backup running backs in the hopes that they get injured this week because it doesn't matter. If you picked up a bunch of handcuffs and have been rostering them all season, it seems that none of them really hit. None of the lottery tickets ended up really hitting. All of the ones that were already kind of drafted, like a Zach Charbonnet was kind of the big one there. Bucky Irving maybe, but at this point of the year, really nothing. We do have one player that we'll talk about, 1.5, I guess, as it pertains to the James Conner injury, that Cardinals backfield. But otherwise, those handcuffs, we had a very healthy running back season. So this show is going to have quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers with decent matchups this week that are available in 25% or more of Yahoo leagues, which should represent every league, right? From the shallowest to the deepest as I work our way down. For the most part, hopefully if you're in the championship in a deep league, you don't need anyone. I don't know even who you'd go to at this point if you really need a deep help. Maybe Ryan Flournoy. But otherwise, let's get into it. We'll start at the quarterback position. And of course, we've got to start with Michael Penix. Michael Penix didn't have a great game in terms of fantasy, but he did throw the ball 27 times. He did have over 200 passing yards. And his interception wasn't really his fault. It was a hilarious pass from Kyle Pitts, essentially, to the defensive back. So I think in a game against Washington, they do take on the Commanders this week, we might actually see some fireworks. Vegas does have this total at 47 points, which is decently high, especially with, two rookie quarterbacks going at it. And while the Washington Commanders are the 21st best matchup against quarterbacks, according to Yahoo's low scoring, I still think that this could end up being good for Michael Penix. I know we just had the massive Bijan Robinson game on the ground, but I think this week, if the Falcons want to win or at least keep it close, it will come down to the pass game. The Commanders have been eaten alive in the secondary all season. I think it will continue this week as well with Michael Penix having a pretty decent game. So if you've made it this far and lost some quarterback to injury or something, you need a quarterback, Michael Penix seems like a decent option to me. Another one's going to be Drake May, this player we've been talking about all season, and he has shown to us that he has a consistent floor. He only has one game under 15 points this year, and out of the last 5 games, that was one of them, but he's had 18 points in 5 out of the last 6 games. 4 out of the last 5 games. Sorry. 18 last week, 18 the week before, 20 against Indianapolis, 14.5 against Miami, and 19 against the Rams. This week, he will be taking on the Chargers, which are a middle-of-the-pack defense. But, as we've seen with them and as the Broncos last week, generally the other team does need to put up a decent bit of points. And in New England in particular, Drake May is the one putting up those points. If you're looking for a floor this week and Drake May is still out there, I think he's an excellent option. Not quite the ceiling that I think a Michael Penix has in terms of like what this game could turn into. But Drake May should still get you at least 15 points with a 20-25 point ceiling potentially against this Chargers team, depending on how many touchdowns go his way and not like Ramondre's or something like that. But either way, it's a decent matchup, and he's widely available. Another quarterback that's widely available as a decent matchup, at least if you look at like maybe the Vegas expectations, is going to be the Eagles-Cowboys game. Cooper Rush is widely available. And while the Eagles are pretty good, as a secondary, they're the 30th matchup against quarterbacks on Yahoo. I still believe that he could get it done. We've seen Cooper Rush be pretty consistent over the last few weeks with no Dak Prescott, and he's coming off a few weeks in a row, 3 straight weeks with 15 or more points. This is definitely more for your more desperate options if he's like the only guy out there. I think that while the matchup is tough on paper, the game script should work in a way to where he is scoring some points, especially if there's no Jalen Hurts, right? Just Cooper Rush versus Kenny Pickett, one of those garbage but good games for fantasy is kind of what I'm expecting here. So I know it's a gross option, but Cooper Rush against the Philadelphia Eagles isn't the worst thing in the world, and he's widely available. And lastly, Bryce Young. Bryce Young's coming off a monster game with 3 touchdowns and 68 rush yards in particular. And next week, we'll be taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are the second best matchup of 2 quarterbacks so far this season. And coming off a game where he put up 27 against the Cardinals, I think he'll be able to keep the momentum going. We've seen Bryce Young show a lot of consistency since he's returned in the absence of Andy Dalton. It has earned that starting job. In a divisional game against Tampa, I really, really do like his odds here. Vegas actually has this as a 49.5-point game, which is the highest on the slate. And that's pretty impressive for the Panthers, right? To find themselves in this type of situation and to see Vegas actually kind of respecting that offense now. A big part of that is Bryce Young. So if he's still available in your leagues, which he is, he was the most available quarterback, literally more available than even Cooper Rush. I don't hate it. This is a really solid matchup with some decent implications in terms of wanting to play. I know that the Panthers are out this season, but the Buccaneers are still very much fighting for the division, and every team likes to play spoiler, especially in the division, right? So Bryce Young and those Panthers should be fired up, should be a decent game, and I like the matchup for him. If you're looking for a quarterback, Bryce Young's really not a bad option. And I've got a few running backs for you as well. Again, this was 25% or more available, so there's not a ton out there, and all of the backups are still backups at this point, and there's not too much reason to pick up handcuffs this time of year with only 1 game left. You're really just shooting for the moon and trying to find someone you could rely on. So Amir Abdullah in PPR leagues is not bad. It's all passing game work, but luckily this week against Jacksonville, he did get a rushing touchdown, but he has back-to-back weeks now with 6 or more targets. And is coming off a game where he had over 10 touches with no Sincere McCormick, with no Zamir White. It is him and Alexander Madison, and Amir Abdullah is the pass-catching one. They take on the Saints this week, the 9th best matchup to opposing running backs. And that's not too shabby. Back-to-back weeks with over 15 fantasy points. If you need someone, again, he's only going to get like 10 touches, and you're definitely hoping for a touchdown. But even in PPR, he should get you there in terms of the floor, should catch a decent bit of passes, and be cool. So I don't hate it. I know it's gross, but if you're looking for a running back, Amir Abdullah is really, really the only one. But Audric Estime in Denver is a decent option, again, especially if Jaleel McLaughlin is to miss time like it looks. We talked about with the Jaleel McLaughlin injury, it doesn't make things great for the Denver backfield, but it does consolidate it between Audric Estime and Javonte Williams. And Audric Estime did out-touch Javonte Williams, or not out-touch, out-carry 9-4. But Javonte Williams did have 7 receptions to kind of even it out. But either way, the Broncos are taking on the Bengals, which have been finding themselves in shootouts. And so if Audric Estime is going to get about 10 touches, one of those could hopefully end up being a touchdown. That's about what he had against the Chargers, 50 yards and a touchdown. Not a bad performance. It's not a great performance, but in this game, you're just kind of latching on to the potential shootout. Vegas also has this game at 49.5 points, like that Buccaneers-Panthers game, so tied for the highest point total on the slates. You got to chase that sometimes, and if you need a running back, Audric Estime is widely available, and someone you could at least trust a little bit to get a decent bit of volume and just hope he falls into the end zone. And lastly, James Conner did pick up a knee injury. At the time of recording this, we're not sure what the severity of it is, but it was a knee injury, so we have to assume he's probably going to miss time, especially since the Cardinals were eliminated from playoff contention. We shouldn't really expect much. So with that being said, there's 2 different options here, and it's going to start with Michael Carter. I know a lot of people and this thumbnail are saying Trey Benson, but it was Michael Carter who got the opportunity this week because Trey Benson was hurt, and we're not so sure that he'll be able to return this week. It was a minor ankle injury, so it is very possible he goes out there. But again, the Cardinals season is over. They may not want to risk their new potential future running back's health. By throwing him out there in a meaningless game and just rely on Michael Carter to end the year. So I know that Trey Benson is an option. I'm going to say add Trey Benson if he's available, but I also want to add the nugget to get Michael Carter as well, because Michael Carter had 5 receptions for 30 yards, and that really is nothing to scoff at, especially if he's going to get some carries as well if there is no Trey Benson. If he's the only back in this field because Amari DeMercado is on IR, then you kind of have to trust that Michael Carter seems to be a very interesting option for the fantasy championship, but also so is Trey Benson. If Trey Benson does play, I'll go ahead and say I would rather start Trey Benson. I think that if they're throwing him out there, they do want to get a good look at him. But I also think that right now, as of recording this, there is a good potential that they just, don't really go to Trey Benson. They don't want to risk his health. They could just use Michael Carter. The season's over. Why even risk it? So that's kind of where I'm at with that. We'll see how it develops. Definitely keep your eye on it, as it's looking like James Conner will not be playing, which will leave the door open to Michael Carter, Trey Benson, or both. So that's kind of it for the running backs, though. So let's move on to wide receiver. And I'm going to start with Hollywood Brown. He did not fit the 25% category. He's rostered in like 34% of Yahoo leagues, but he is still widely available because not a lot of people expected him to play. He did play, and he had 8 targets. So if he's out there, he's kind of the priority wide receiver ad. They are taking on the Steelers tomorrow on Christmas, which could end up being a decent game for the wide receiver position. So just kind of look at that one if he's available. More than likely he's not. But again, just wanted to mention him as he did kind of become an option as of late. But otherwise, here's some wide receivers that at least have piqued my interest. Again, I mean, hopefully you don't have to rely on these. A lot of these is just kind of desperate plays at this time of year in terms of them being available, but they're decent enough matchups, and we'll talk about them and just kind of see. So Ray McCloud, again, we talk about Michael Penix. The Falcons are taking on the Commanders. Could end up being a little bit of a shootout. And Ray McCloud did have 4 targets and a carry in the game against the Giants. Not great, but not bad. If you're in kind of a deeper full PPR league, it's not an awful option to throw Ray McCloud out there in a potential shootout. You have no idea where the touches will go. Probably Drake London and Darnell Mooney, but he had 5 touches against the Giants. If you could get 5 touches or maybe more, given it's a shootout this week, it could end up being pretty decent. So in full PPR leagues, and it's a little bit deeper if you really need an option, I don't hate Ray McCloud. I really don't. Next is going to be Brandon Cooks. And this kind of leans into the Jalen Tolbert injury, just kind of see what's going on there. If Jalen Tolbert is out, those touches will kind of be sent to Brandon Cooks, maybe Kavontae Turpin as well, but definitely Brandon Cooks, who over the last few weeks has at least been fine. Against Tampa, not great. Only 3 receptions for 48 yards. Against Carolina, only 3 receptions for 34 yards, but he had a touchdown against Cincinnati and a touchdown against the Giants. If he's going to be the wide receiver 2 against the Eagles, that's not too shabby. Again, we're talking about Cooper Rush being a potential option here. More points could be scored than expected, and Brandon Cooks could find himself in the end zone. Again, these are not like great options that I'm super excited about, but when you're talking about a divisional matchup on the road, the Cowboys wanted to play spoiler, no Jalen Tolbert injury, or no Jalen Tolbert either. That injury kind of leaving the door open for someone to catch a little bit more passes. I think that would probably be Brandon Cooks. He's widely available. If you need an option, I don't necessarily hate it with this matchup. It is tough. Like, I know that the Eagles are very, very good against wide receivers, but we just saw like the Commanders do very well against them, and generally points are still going to come, even if it's tough to get them. So I don't know. I don't mind this matchup at all. This Cowboys-Eagles one, and Brandon Cooks is available if you need an option. The next few, I'm not going to lie, I don't feel great at. As we've talked about all season, I never really feel great about adding wide receivers. They're just so hit or miss. But again, some people need options. Injuries have happened. They find themselves here having a hole and at least want to talk through some other options that are available. So Devon Velle. Again, we talk about Audric Estime. This Cincinnati-Denver Broncos game, one of the highest Vegas point totals on the board. Devon Velle has been very hit or miss, but is coming off a game where he had 2 receptions, 21 yards, and a touchdown. We've seen him score another touchdown before this season. We've seen a 9-target game from him this season. And a potential shootout against the Bengals, I don't mind finding a Broncos wide receiver out there. For the most part, that means it's going to be Devon Vele or Tim Patrick maybe, but Tim Patrick just kind of seems to be the one not really getting the volume as much as I wanted it to happen. It seems it's more so Devon Vele, at least finding the end zone. So, I mean, either one. I mean, if you are in a deeper league and Tim Patrick's the only available one and you really need an option, sure. Again, I don't mind this Broncos-Bengals game at all. But for the most part, more standard, you're probably looking at Devon Vele. I don't feel great about it, but I don't hate it either. Next, if you're looking for a boom or bust option, and this is really only if there's no George Pickens, it's Calvin Austin. They do play the Chiefs on Wednesday. We haven't seen Pickens in a while. Pickens says he's good, but again, this is a very, very short week. So I'm not sure that George Pickens is going to be able to go. If he can't, Calvin Austin does have 2 straight games with 5 or more targets, with 5 targets, and has found the end zone a couple times this season. Against the Chiefs, the Steelers are definitely going to have to pass the ball. And if there's no George Pickens, Calvin Austin should get 4 or 5 targets again and perhaps find the end zone. I mean, back-to-back weeks with 5 targets and 65 receiving yards is not too bad. A decent matchup against the Chiefs, at least in terms of game script potential. So Calvin Austin, a little bit of an option there if you want one. I don't hate it. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either against the Chiefs on Christmas, especially if there's no Pickens. And again, the Panthers. Talked about Bryce Young. They're taking on the Buccaneers, high Vegas total. I know Jalen Coker was very disappointing this week, but he still had 5 targets. Yes, he only brought in 2 of them for 8 yards, and that was the thing, right? We talked about it. Like, yeah, he had 110 yards and a touchdown against Dallas, but 83 of that was one play. So we shouldn't get too excited about it, but still, it's looking like Xavier Legette is going to miss a game. It's again, and it's looking like this game will be a shootout against Tampa Bay. So if he's going to be a lock for 5 or so targets, that's a player we should at least look at. We don't feel great about it, but we don't hate it either. Jalen Coker against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a top 10 wide receiver matchup with one of the highest Vegas totals on the board this week. Look at Coker. The last 2 are probably not, but maybe. Dorian Thompson-Robinson's already been announced the starter in Cleveland, so I'm really not sure about that game. Like, I know Elijah Moore's an option, and Malik Washington is a potential option here. This one's more so for the dynasty folks that still have a chance to get him, but also a matchup against Cleveland is a top 5 wide receiver matchup. If Jalen Waddle is out, we could see him catch some passes as well. He has 4 targets last week, 6 targets the week before that. And I know that Cleveland's not going to score a lot of points, but it is still a good matchup for wide receivers. So if Waddle misses a game, we could see Malik Washington get 4 or 5 targets again and just hope he finds the end zone with one of those. Not a great option. Again, really none of these are great options, but they're available and they have good matchups and potentials for volume. So Malik Washington is an option this week against Cleveland, even with DTR on the other side. And lastly, the Texans. With no Tank Dell, someone is probably going to step up. We saw earlier this season it was John Mechie. So John Mechie is available. They are taking on the Baltimore Ravens, which is the second best matchup for wide receivers in fantasy. Teams have been shredding them in the air all season. So I like John Mechie a lot this week if he suits up, though. He has been injured, so we're not so sure that he will. If he doesn't, it'll probably be Robert Woods. Robert Woods did have 3 receptions in Tank Dell's absence. So if there is no John Mechie, you could probably fire up Robert Woods against the Baltimore Ravens. However, I'm more so thinking it's just going to be Nico Collins, maybe Dalton Schultz, Joe Mixon, kind of all consolidated. But someone's going to catch some passes. So it's either Robert Woods or John Mechie. I'm thinking it's John Mechie. That's what we've seen before, and they like to lean on the youth at this time of year. But we could see Robert Woods step up, get some old man points in the championship as well, especially if there is no Mechie. And on to the tight end position. This is always tough. Hopefully, if you're in the championship, you have a tight end. But just in case, Noah Fant. Noah Fant is taking on the Chicago Bears. That is the 12th best matchup for tight ends. We've been talking about it over the last few weeks. The Bears in particular have been kind of eaten alive by the tight end position. Sam Laporta, TJ Hawkinson, really you name it. Players have been having their best game of the season against this Bears team as a tight end. Noah Fant is coming off 2 straight games with 6 or more targets. Hasn't really done too much this season. More than likely won't do too much, but it's a good enough matchup. The Seahawks are passing the ball. They're still kind of fighting for the division as well. So I don't hate it. Noah Fant against the Chicago Bears. Next is Tyler Conklin versus the Buffalo Bills. Generally a tough tight end matchup, but given the potential game script here, I'm not too worried about it. He did just have 7 targets, brought in 5 of them for 59 yards against the Rams. And Vegas is expecting a decent amount of points this week for this game. Now, of course, that's mostly just going to come for the Bills, but 46.5 points will be something to look at for sure and chase. And if you need tight end help, Tyler Conklin's a fun one. He generally gets about 5 targets and can always have a chance to find the end zone. Don't love the option. Hopefully you don't need a tight end this week, but going up against the Buffalo Bills, the Jets will be playing catch up. Someone's going to catch passes. Why not Tyler Conklin somewhere if you need a tight end? And lastly, Chig Okonkwo. Chig Okonkwo has 2 straight weeks with 10 or more targets, 8 receptions or more in both those games. And this week is taking on the Jaguars, who is the 8th best matchup against tight ends. We just saw Chig Okonkwo again, 9 receptions, 81 yards off of 11 targets. I don't see why he can't continue this. This was one of our top tight end targets for the playoffs a few weeks back because of these matchups. Very, very good matchups. And now he's getting the volume as well, being able to demonstrate his athleticism. Chig Okonkwo is looking like a really solid option. This would be the priority out of the tight ends if you had to choose one. Like him a lot, especially with Mason Rudolph at the helm now. It's a little bit more of a consistent offense. So with it being a good matchup, on top of him having a good amount of volume over the last few weeks, you should add and start Chig Okonkwo if you need a tight end in your championship. And lastly, just an all-encompassing thing, if you've somehow made it to the end of this video and you're not competing, what should you do, really? You just look on your waiver wire for disappointing rookies like Javon Baker, Roman Wilson, Devontae Walker, Ryan Flournoy, Cody Schrader, just these running backs too, like a Blake Corum if he was dropped, a Jalen Wright if he was dropped, if Trey Benson was dropped, any of these backup running backs really that were dropped, go ahead and add them as they will gain some value as the offseason goes along. And then the IR players as well, like a Roman Wilson, if he was dropped, or really just any injured player that was dropped because they were kind of fringe anyway. You really never know. That's some free value out there. So if you're just looking for some fun players to add, go ahead and just look through your waiver wire, look for some disappointing rookies, look for some injured players, and just go ahead and add them, as this is kind of your last week to get ahead of that curve. And that'll do it, guys. Congratulations on a fun season. This is your last waiver wire week. I hope it goes super well for you. I will be tomorrow, another recorded Christmas episode. We'll be doing a special going over the 2 Christmas slate games, giving you my DFS lineups, my start sits of those games, and really any of the advice for those games in the Christmas spirit. So it will be a fun little episode as well. And then we'll be back live on Thursday going over everything. Looking forward to week 17 and beyond. So everyone, you are an incredible audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully I was able to answer a lot of your questions in the chat. Go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe, and have a wonderful Christmas Eve and a Merry Christmas. I will see you all on Christmas, pre-recorded, and see you all again live on Thursday. Have a wonderful couple days. Enjoy your friends and family. You guys are awesome. Hit that like, hit that subscribe. Peace.
Hey, I want to thank you for being part of this broadcast. If you have any thoughts on it, leave a comment. If you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to see more shows on the Player Profiler channel, subscribe to it. That's how we know you want more.